There we go. Welcome to January 23rd, today's meeting of the Platforms Working Group in CNCF. Good to see everyone here. Just posting the notes one more time into the chat. That's our agenda and notes for today. So we've got a couple things today. Well, really just one thing. We have the SCORE team here to present SCORE to us. But before we even get started, we like to let folks that are new have a chance to introduce yourself, tell us your interests, and how we can turn to you for support here. So if anyone wants to come off mute and introduce yourself, please do. Hi, Bruno. Go for it.
Hello, guys. Nice to meet you. My name is Bruno. I'm a Brazilian working from Brazil for VTEX. You probably don't know about, but it's an e-commerce platform. So we're very B2B, so it's hard for regular people to know about. We're actually pretty big in Latin America, right? And my interest here in the group is mostly because we have a past today just because we need to have one. It's a mess. And we're trying to organize this. So I'm using some of the white papers you guys wrote about that. And we had a big meetup the last week with several folks from SRE and developer experience in the company, where we discussed how we're going to approach this. So yeah, I'd like to bring some insights, but I wanted to hear from you guys. It's the first time I'm here, so not exactly familiar with the format of the meeting, but I want to absorb a bit and maybe have a chance to talk about, like, from our experience reading the white paper, discussing with people what to get out of that. So it's a bit of a feedback from myself as well. That's it.
Thank you, Bruno. Yeah, we're definitely trying to figure out how to gather feedback. That's one of our initiatives, which we'll mention today, an interviewing framework. So we'll mention that today. Yes, Patrick or Krzysztof, I think you were next. Sorry.
Patrick, you want to start? We are colleagues, basically, so.
Yeah, you can start.
Okay, so I will. I can start. Okay, I'm Chris. I'm a platform engineering and IT management advisor with like 4 years constant experience as internal developer platform manager, and in general, commercially in IT, I'm for 11 years already. Personally, since I was a kid, I think. Right now, I work in Bluesoft and also under my own brand. Bluesoft is one of the largest Polish software houses on the market. I have my own YouTube. I have my own blog about IT and platform engineering, especially. Together with Patrick, we also lecture platform engineering in one of the Polish academies. So we're basically spreading the news to the students. And generally, this is why we are here. And basically, I want to be a part of this global development of platform engineering and just to spread the news to the whole world that it's actually a better utilization of DevOps practices and tools that we had before the platform engineering. So thank you, and I'm very glad to be here.
Okay, I can quickly move on. So welcome everyone. I'm Patrick. Yeah, Krzysztof, colleague from Bluesoft. We are based in Warsaw. I think I have like more than 6 or 7 years experience in IT, and I also work in different roles through that time, like software engineer, DevOps, team lead, then platform engineer, and now I'm, let's say, in the new role as a solution architect in Bluesoft. And my, let's say, 3 areas on which I'm focusing right now in this year is platform engineering, software supply chain security, and the new area which now I'm exploring is LLM Ops, because of the platform which I'm currently building. This is the platform for the development teams who are utilizing large language models. So generally they are building the RAG type applications, and also they let's say they are developing toward, like fine-tuning models and maybe at some point creating some own models from scratch. Yeah, and I'm here just to, to learn new things and to contribute if I will have something valuable to you. So glad to be here.
Good to hear about other kinds of platforms like LLM ops platforms. Makes sense. Does anybody else want to take just 20 seconds? Introduce yourself. Still a last chance.
Yeah, Antoine here.
Hey,
you already know me, but I'm going to introduce my team. They are here today. So we have Amin and Victor. We are here today because we are working on a workload specification as well, and
Very
how
cool.
it will interact with our private cloud platform. So this is a topic we are quite interested.
Cool.
Hello.
All right. Yeah, so it's 10:09. Let's move along. Anyone else want to jump off or just quickly? And then we'll move along. Okay, so in our ongoing work section today, I just wanted to call out there's been a number of issues open in our GitHub repo to discuss, I think, pretty relevant topics about the paper, a couple of our papers. Let me just share the link to I did tag them with Ouija platforms discuss, so that you can quickly find, things that are up for discussion. If Does anyone want to bring any of those up for discussion here with the group? Wanted to offer that possibility. If not, then I would just say, folks, take a look at the things, and there's definitely some. I think one that stood out to me is the very end category and metrics. Somebody asked what the definition is of that, and that's been something I've been trying to think about when I present the platform's maturity model. So take a look at that issue. And let's have discussions. Yes, Marsh.
Yeah, speaking of definitions, can I jump in on glossary, or do you want to wait for that?
Oh yeah, please do. Please do. Let's add
Okay.
that to the agenda.
I added in there in the work in progress stuff. Here, I'll put a link to it in the chat too. Give me 2 seconds. After the maturity model was over, we're V1 of the after we published it. The glossary needed some updating to help reconcile between the white paper and the glossary. Work began on that, I think December maybe, and it went for a round of comments. We had a bunch of input from folks, but now it's getting close to the end. So V2 feels like, with reasonable confidence, it's getting close. You all are the test of that, and I'll put a link to it in Slack as well. But like, here's a chance to jump in and see, is this making sense? Are there mistakes? Are there other things we should be tracking for V3 of this glossary? Because I'm pretty sure there'll be a V3. Yeah, the goal is I think there's a timeline at the top of the document for when it's meant to be done, but sometime in the next week, maybe the next 5 days, I think we said the 28th, we'd like to turn it into a pull request. So the best time to do collaborative work found is in the Google Doc. So please jump in if you have the time and give feedback, corrections, improvements. Thanks. And shout out to Abby, who and Josh, you both heroically jumped in along the way too, and others. So thanks. I don't know. I don't think we tracked contributions to the document before. Maybe we should consider that. That's all I got. Abby or Josh or anyone else who has comments, please add.
No, it looks good to me. I'm glad we're getting that organized. And yeah, thank you for leading that, Marsh. One other note, we haven't really progressed on interviews. I don't believe in the past couple of weeks. I haven't been able to conduct any. But we do have the interview template, which we created, and we did run a couple interviews in December. If anyone wants to share any progress on that or any interviews they've run, please do. Otherwise, the information is in the notes.
Quick question. I did join one of the interviews and I thought it was interesting. And I think if I can find time to contribute, I'd like to. At this point, how does one get involved if they want to either support an interviewer or be an interviewer? Follow up with Michael? Is that?
That's a good question. Yeah, you could follow up with Michael. And Dominique, I think, who's on this, was he here? He's been leading some of the work there as well.
There's Michael. Hi,
Dominique,
Michael.
what do you think our next steps are here?
Yeah. Oh, Michael's there.
Hey,
Oh, Michael's
everyone.
there.
Sorry, a little late.
So
Yeah, sorry.
you do it. You do it. So fun.
Well, I'm playing a little bit of catch up here. It seems like, not a lot of people had time going into January out of the holidays. Where we left things off is we ran a few interviews. The way we ended the last one is we had essentially a retro session on what can be improved on, what we learned, where do we want to take it, and there's kind of a little bit of a laundry list of how many different interview types we need, how do we qualify the right people, what does it mean to put together a playbook so that anybody in the community can join and become an interviewer and has a guide to how they would recruit, which interview they would use, how they do outreach and referrals, and then obviously the research and synthesis part. I just saw a thread around this as I jumped in, and I think there's a lot of confusion around like what are the open tasks? How do you jump in? Oh, sorry, I got an app that opened up in front of me. I think we could do a better job of adding this as like actual discrete pieces of work to GitHub, so everybody can actually view and track each task. Right now, it's been a little bit conversational. Some of the stuff is in Google Docs, some of it is in threads. We have duplicate channels. So I think one of the things now is just clean up and create like transparency around where we are and what the next steps could be and how people can jump in and rally around them. I think that's like the number one thing, just the level of confusion around the work right now. So I think Dominic and I and anybody who's been kind of part of that early phase of work wants to jump in and help with a little bit of cleanup so that it's easier for new folks to join and contribute. It'd be great if we could set something like that up for this week, something just time boxed to just do cleanup.
I mean, as Michael said, there's like two main points of work currently. First is looking over the interview script and get a better confidence in that. So if you want to be on the interviewer side instead of the interviewee side, please check out the link. I posted it into the notes as well. And on the second thing is then if you have any ideas who you would want to interview or you yourself would see you as an interviewee for us, then please feel free to reach out to Michael or me, and then we get that on our list of potential recruits, and we will reach out.
Yeah.
So I have some time today, and I'll go through and look at how we could organize a little better and propose some structure and send that to you, like Michael and Dominic. Seems like maybe we could use a few tracking tickets in GitHub, and I started reviewing the questionnaire and the two existing interview notes, and I'll post some stuff about that. And I also had there's an entry I made in the Paris for Paris about potentially standardizing a shorter form survey based off of the questionnaire for sort of walk-ups in Paris, and potentially even having like an area for interviews or a way to do walk-up interviews. So I'll kind of bundle that up, and then we can just independently find time to meet later in the week and then discuss it all.
Yeah, that sounds good. The other part of it, aside from the actual scripts, recruitment, the playbook for anybody who wants to join, is the research component of it. What do we do once we gather this information? I think, Josh, it seems like we're not.
Yeah, we don't have anything from CNCF. I'm sorry about that. So we're gonna
Yeah,
have to.
no worries. So open to ideas of how we can do this in a kind of a community-driven way where there are going to be a lot of people who want to participate in the synthesis work. So we don't step on each other's toes. Like the process of, we want to make sure we have transcriptions. We want people going through it to tease out kind of themes that match across interviews, surface that in a way without like duplicating a lot of effort, which requires tooling and process. So that's the open question for us.
So
What
one of
could-
the things I brought up last time we met was converting the interview process into I was thinking of standardizing on like Markdown or something, but then Josh brought up we could use Google Forms, and that way we could collect it all as data and then create whatever process or render it out. So I was thinking you'd want to look at things different ways, look at an interview or look at all the same question or same answers from different ways to group the data, and then people could provide comments. And it's a place to start at least, because I think the loose document style that we have now is not gonna scale beyond a few interviews.
No, yeah. So these are all the kind of open questions and we need to address. Like, what are the options for how we actually bring all of this data together and tease out something structured and meaningful on the other end of it? Sorry, Abby.
No, I didn't want to interrupt. Sorry. I thought this might be a good time to to introduce one of the PRs that just recently got merged for the website, which is around contributions. So there's contributions and under contributions projects. This is a spot where we're keeping track of things that aren't like current issues. So I think you're 100% right. Open up a GitHub issue if you're looking for active contributors, like in the kind of near term, like that's like a time box, like this is something we're actively working on today, which is I think where we're at with these interviews right now. But this is also a type of thing that I think we want to have over time. And so I could see it evolving to being something that's on this kind of projects page where it's sort of a never-ending thing, a thing that we perpetually would like to get people sharing their stories about and getting involved in. So I just want to call attention to that to people in the group in case there is something interesting in there. And an example being that we're looking for more concrete examples about the maturity model. This is something that's an ongoing activity. It's not something that we're time boxing. So if you feel like you work in an organization that's applying the maturity model and want to share more about it, you might find that as an interesting thing that you can participate in.
+1. I really like the idea of creating something which will last in the longer term. And we have a lot of the folks on the call, Michael. You didn't even hear the intros, I think, but there's a lot of people that probably would be good candidates for you. So when we're ready to ask for next volunteers, I think you have a selection to choose from. I'm looking forward to that.
That's great. I think one of the big things that came out of kind of the first two iterations of the interview we've run, just to kind of dogfood it and learn in a kind of friendly internal way, was when we talk to platform folks, depending on who we talk to, there are certain things that they can answer and certain things that they can't, but there is a path of referrals, right, into the organizations. So I think that's one thing we want to establish very clearly, like, hey, maybe you can only talk about the platform to a certain extent, but your manager can talk about like business level KPIs or can give us like a more insight into like organizational challenges and how they relate to like what success means and how business objectives line up to platform goals. So
that was my issue, Michael, because I was not able to reply to question about some capabilities. And today we have the other teams, the software factory I was talking about, they use their part a bit different because we are a big company, so we have some different teams. So maybe next time they can be a follow-up to my interview if you and they want to give a new iteration after my own, could be.
Yeah. I mean, that was thanks, Mark. That's one of the things that came out of that. And in some ways it seems like, you know, we're expanding the scope and this can get a little messy, but I think with this playbook of how people can run this like beginning to end around the few organizations or the one organization they want to focus on, you can get like those 2 or 3 interviews and bring them in yourself without, you know, having like a small core of people that are responsible for this work.
That's our goal.
Right. So we can go pretty far with it if there's like a common playbook around this work, which is one of the things we still need to do.
Okay, so I want to go ahead and time box this here now. So Michael and Dominique, thank you for leading, and we'll look forward to the next steps. Let's go ahead and shift on now, if everyone's okay with that, we're going to hear from the folks that are publishing the score spec, which has been submitted to CNCF Sandbox. So I believe that's Susa and someone else here. If Susa, do you want to start us off and introduce your Mathieu, I think also want to introduce yourselves and get us started. We can give you about 25 minutes or so here.
Okay, yeah, sure. That sounds great.
Thank you.
I would just take over and start by sharing my screen if that's fine. Let's see. Cool. Did that work? Are you guys able to see my screen? Nice.
Good.
Yes.
Sounds great. Cool. Yeah, so just a quick intro. I'm Susa. I'm a product manager at Humanitech and have also been contributing to SCORE, the project we'll be talking about today, essentially since it was launched. And yeah, with me is Mathieu. Feel free to also quickly introduce yourself if you like, Mathieu.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Mathieu Benoit. I'm customer engineer doing platform engineering with customer and passionate about community, Kubernetes, CNCF, and what you all are doing. So thank you for having us today.
Cool. And yeah, maybe just a really quick intro about SCORE. So as it says here, it was launched end of 2022. So it's still quite young. In this past year, we're very much focused on spreading the word, collecting feedback, understanding essentially whether the idea resonates with developers, and in terms of user experience, of course, kind of understanding what works and what we have to improve. And now we feel that we have a good handle on where we want to go and how we want to develop the tool. So yeah, we thought it's a great time to donate our project to the CNCF. So that's what we did this month, and yeah, submitted our application. And if there are no further questions, I would jump right into the presentation. We'll try to keep the bit on SCORE quite short so that we can focus in on the demo and any questions on your guys' end. Cool. So I'll just start with a quick overview and an intro by diving into SCORE's concepts and philosophy. So essentially, there are a few pain points that built this foundation for SCORE. The first one being cloud native devs experience increased cognitive load due to tech and tools that require specialized knowledge. So in simple terms, cloud native development can be quite complicated. Developers are often no longer in a place where they're just writing code. They're often exposed to infrastructure or orchestration related tooling, such as Kubernetes or Helm, for example. And yeah, that essentially leads to less focused coding time, as they're blocked by infrastructure or configuration work, for example. And this kind of directly relates to the next point. Different config rules and values between environments increase the risk of configuration inconsistencies. So what I mean by that is usually the closer your code moves to production, the more complicated it gets. So locally, you might work with a tool such as Docker Compose, but then the next step would be to deploy to a remote development environment, and then you're suddenly faced with additional tooling. So you might run your integration tests on Google Cloud Run, and then deploy to a platform such as Kubernetes via Helm, for example. And this essentially causes the risk of configuration inconsistencies. So this is almost like a translation issue. the question of how do you keep your configuration consistent while running on these different platforms? So how do you make sure that the workload you're working on is configured the same way it is in Docker Compose locally, in Helm remotely then? So these are kind of the two main pain points that we try to target with Score. And what we advocate for instead, of course, is then devs should focus on writing code rather than dealing with infrastructure concerns. I mean, this point is kind of a spectrum in itself. A lot of devs do feel comfortable with dealing with infrastructure concerns, and that's great. They should keep doing that, but it's just about having this initial abstraction layer in place as a default from which you can dig deeper if you need to. And the second point then being a workload's configuration should be consistent independently of the platform or environment it runs on. Well, before we look into how Score attempts to put this into practice, are there any questions on this? Otherwise, I would move on to how this all looks with Score. So taking a step back just to understand how Score kind of tries to achieve all of these things, we of course need to understand what it is and how it works. So in a nutshell, Score is a developer-centric, platform-agnostic, declarative workload specification. So the Score spec, you're seeing an example on the right-hand side here, essentially captures a workload's runtime requirements. So the idea is that you have one file per workload, and it's saved alongside the workload's code in source control. Now, looking at these three characteristics I pointed out here, the spec is developer-centric. That is because it's tightly scoped. So what we're exposing here is only common workload level items that every developer should be familiar with. And the idea here is to shield developers from kind of the complexity of container orchestrators. And yeah, you can see the example here. We have a container, we have an image, and we're just describing simple concepts here. And then the second bit of platform agnostic is essentially that Score is not tied to a specific platform or tool. So it can be widely integrated with all kinds of container orchestration platforms or tooling. So could be Compose, Helm, Customize, or even Nomad or ECS. So the idea here is really that the Score file is kind of like a common denominator and has that level of abstraction that developers can simply define their workloads independently of the underlying platform. And yeah, then it's declarative. So essentially developers declare or request what their workload requires to run. So far on the Score spec. Now we can look into how all of this actually works in practice. Oh yeah, sure. Go ahead.
If you don't mind, can you go back one slide for a sec?
Yep.
Just curious. The two things at the top, the API versions, is that about the version of Score, or is that referring to the version of the services API that you're exposing?
That's the version of Score. So
okay, great.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I figured. I just want to make sure I understood it because I was trying to wrap my head around it. The second piece was I see the metadata as a service name. How do you, in that, it brings me to wonder, how does this work with service catalogs? Is that a different layer that you expect to be handled through tooling, or and similarly API catalogs? Like, is that outside the scope of what Score is trying to do?
Yeah, that would be pretty much outside of the scope, if I'm not mistaken. It's a use case I haven't thought about so far, but it's really just like describing like workload runtime requirements. So, I mean, of course, any additional metadata could be listed here. And then I'll quickly move over to this one here. Based on the Score implementation, that metadata could be interpreted in a way that might be beneficial for a service catalog. But it's a use case we haven't explored in detail yet.
If you're looking for people to explore with, I would love to chat about it. So we can connect after.
Sounds great. Okay. Cool. Then, yeah, so what I showed here is essentially just the spec, right? It's just like a list of requirements on how to run the workload. Now, we of course need to do something with the spec, and that's how we get to the Score implementation here. The score implementation is essentially the counterpart of the score specification. It's a CLI tool. It could be something like Score Compose, Score Helm, or pretty much any other platform. And the idea here is that the score file is executed against the CLI and generates the according platform configuration file. So if you run your score file against the Score Compose CLI, it will generate a Docker Compose.yaml. So that is essentially the idea here, that you can then take this generated configuration file and combine it with any environment-specific parameters to then deploy the workload in the target environment. Cool. So just going back to the pain points I highlighted initially, just to close the loop here, we mentioned one of the things we're trying to target is increased cognitive load due to tech and tools. So how we're trying to do that here is essentially having developers just deal with the score specification. So they're no longer directly interacting with the underlying platform, such as Compose or Helm. This is kind of the main interface for them. And based on that, they can just generate the configuration needed and dive deeper from there if required. And the second pain point I highlighted before was about configuration drift. So based on the fact that configuration is kind of automatically generated from a single source, so no matter what platform you run on, the main source of your kind of configuration will always be the score file, and it will be automatically generated in a one-directional manner. And that, of course, reduces the risk of configuration inconsistencies. So that would have been a really quick summary of how everything works in theory. Feel free to ask questions if there are any. Otherwise, I would hand over to
Suza, because
yeah, go ahead.
Is this also the place, so if in case of enterprise setup, that from an enterprise you have certain demands and requirements and standardizations, is within would you do this then also within the score implementation, where you would implement all these type of enterprise standardizations and requirements?
So what exactly do you mean by enterprise standardization? So in terms of like,
for example, from an enterprise perspective, I do expect that everything has a certain way of specifying, for example, liveness probes, readiness probes, or that logs are always sent to a certain direction, or
right, yeah.
maybe even certain base images are always in use, that they're applied from a policy perspective. Would this then fit in a score implementation?
Yeah, so again, like first of all, it depends here on what properties we're talking about. So score aims for the separation of concerns. So anything like platform specific, the configuration is in theory just handled by the platform team and is merged in with any configuration required generated by the score file. But in terms of defining the properties within the score file, we're actually currently investigating the creation of an IDE plugin that essentially would allow you to set certain rules for autocomplete, or have essentially a policy in place on what can be defined in your score file and which values are allowed and that kind of stuff. So that doesn't exist today. We have basic validation in place, but no kind of custom rules or standard that can be baked into it yet. But that is also part of what is on our roadmap at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
That kind of tie, we had Mass Driver come and present the Mass Driver spec last time, and the way that they ended up constraining the spec was using JSON schema. It sounds like you're using VS Code, but that would be another possibility.
Exactly, yeah. So currently we have a basic JSON schema in place just to make sure that kind of the requirements of the spec are met, and like input formats and that kind of stuff works out. But we're aware that teams might have more specific requirements based on that. So yeah, just having the option to kind of have your own schemas apply there, be it through an IDE plugin or something else, is definitely a use case that we're hoping to serve in the near future.
And would you have to write your own, like, to the question about how a platform engineering team could use SCORE to standardize practices like a base image? Is that basically a platform team has to write their own implementation to encompass their requirements?
That is the idea. I mean, what we offer out of the box is kind of the basic validation so that you don't like break any of the implementations. But if you have additional requirements on top of that, that would be platform responsibility, exactly.
Cool.
Cool. Any other
Well, I guess maybe
questions?
more in the similar vein to what Josh mentioned is, do you provide base implementations? Is that like you provide a Docker Compose conversion?
Yeah, exactly. So we currently have two reference implementations in place, which is here SCORE Compose and SCORE Helm, as shown in the presentation. These are reference implementations. So essentially, we want to highlight how things could look like. And they're mostly a source of inspiration, though. So the idea is really that the SCORE file is adapted across kind of various platforms and tooling. It could also be that the way we created our SCORE Compose implementation doesn't work for someone, so they could kind of just fork it and extend it according to their needs. But we do have these two implementations in place kind of to just get you started. But we're essentially, the main goal for us right now is to collaborate with other teams to look at further implementations that could be helpful.
I'm sorry, I jumped in and there were a couple of people with hands up. Thank you.
Hi, I just have one question. Regarding the abstraction level of a workload, would that, I don't know if there is general guidance on this, would that represent like a microservice or a collection of, I don't know, can you specify many containers?
Yeah, so generally the scope is always just kind of the workload in front of the developer. And you can, of course, have several containers within that workload. And you can also define dependencies on other workloads. But the SCORE file itself will really just contain the details of that specific workload in front of you.
Okay, thank you.
Andre, you had your hand up?
Yeah. So I think like we've built something like this at our company where we have a custom client-side YAML file definition that we take a tool or some work CI jobs and convert that and make that do stuff. And then we have also a server-side CRD, which is like more Kubernetes native that our operator uses. And we find like there are certain, like the goal is still like the same. Our users, we want to give them something simpler than everything underneath, but then it can't be both client and server because not everything we don't run everything we do in developer land in Kubernetes, right? There's Docker, there's anything client side. How do you see like SCORE being like, if you have a server side but you want to use the same definition, you have the tool would also convert it into a YAML that then gets that then gets processed by Kubernetes if you want to have convert this to some server side things. And then like maybe like this do you see as like one file that then you run this one file client side and then maybe it does like 10 things client side, 2 things server side. Yeah, how some places implemented this?
So I haven't heard of the specific use case yet. Usually we like really just go like platform by platform. So like we always look at this flow like from local to production, right? Local, you'll just need SCORE to Docker Compose, and then you might deploy to Kubernetes, so it's SCORE to Helm. But generally, I mean, the main thing that we're really offering is the spec. And the spec is kind of the common denominator that like describes all the workload items, and your CLI that you create based on that is really open to do whatever is required for your platform. So this is all just about creating something on the receiving end here that is able to resolve that SCORE file. I think the main thing to pay attention to if you want to have like specific server side things in here, like we're keeping it simple by design. So I'm not sure if that would be possible without kind of the developer having to configure additional things within their score file, but like the complexity can also be baked into the score implementation. So that can do all of the heavy lifting based on the properties defined by the developer in the score file. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure if I totally got it.
Yeah, I think it helps. I think like what I'm trying to say, like we built something like this ourselves at our company over the several years, and I think
Yeah.
others have too. And I think yeah, it'd be great too that if we at least align on something industry wide of like don't build the entire spec yourself or don't build all the CLI. Like same way how operator, everybody's not rebuilding operators. There's like operator SDK, and then you customize it. This could be a similar thing for don't build everything customized, like yeah, don't build your own client side thing. Just take this and then customize it to your specific company needs. Because there's
Exactly.
like
Yeah.
a pattern already that's accepted throughout most platform teams.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, with the score spec, you kind of get like the default spec out of the box. But something we're also currently working on is kind of extending the spec based on your needs. So we're looking into creating some kind of extensions library. So let's say you're like a heavy Kubernetes user and you actually want to integrate a couple of more properties into the spec file that are not supported by default. That would be kind of an opportunity to plug in additional logic as needed. Because like at the end of the day, we're aware that the spec that we're providing is just a baseline. And if we can agree on that, that's great. But of course, there will be use cases that require customization or just kind of implementations working in a slightly different way. Well, I think there are a few more hands up. Yeah.
Yes, my point is similar to Andre's point, and also I think Abby is her name. Sorry, I don't know folks yet, but like I can give a bit of the insight of the challenge that I have on my organization. Like a developer, it goes all the way down to define memory and CPU constraints, like how much memory and CPU you want. Like if it's a CPU bound or a workload, for instance. You define things like I want to run in at least 2 availability zones. In the case we use AWS, but the concept is universal, right? And we also can define like the CPU arc that you want to run, if you allow to run on ARM processors or not. And the images, they are created by different teams. So they don't really choose the exact image. They choose like from a set of images. So in our environment, we already have this kind of challenges. We are going the direction similar to what Andre's company did, right? We have our own spec. The developer puts all of those constraints. We have another spec, which is the SRE team, that is basically the platform team, have their own constraints. For instance, if someone asks for 2 availability zones, which zones are those? Because it's not in the concern of the developers, in concern of the whole platform team that runs all of the applications. Like we want to leave this availability zone in favor of another one because you have better spot availability prices or whatnot. The developer doesn't choose which zones, but they want how many zones. So you're kind of splitting between a logical view, like the developers give you logical constraints. The SRE team gives other set of logical constraints, and out of this, we need to materialize into something that actually says, hey, this is the availability zone we're going to run with this architecture, with this machine type. In the case of nodes, we're going to select the cluster. So I would love that connects to points from Andre, that I would love to not need to build all of this from scratch, because that's where we are. But like in the case of Score, it's very developer centric. So my SRE team, which is the platform team, like basically they just need, I'm just pushing the complexity towards them, right? So I wish I had something that actually fulfills for both use cases, right? They both need to put logical constraints on what we're doing, and they materialize into something we go to production. I didn't want to look at the platform team as they deal with the lower level. I want them to be a bit higher level as well. Like they don't deserve so much complexity, you know. It's already hard enough. So that's where I'm coming from. I'm not saying change your whole project. That's not, but I'm trying to give you some insight on when I look at Score, I get excited because of the developer part, but the other side of it, like just pushes complexity towards the platform engineers. I feel like that is not really going to work for us. So that's how I look at it.
And that's really good point. And I see the time flying, and I know Lou and Raphael, you raise your hand. And let me continue the discussion, because that's really good point. Actually, that's really good point. And that's the kind of discussion we want to have with that. And do you see my screen? It's a Visual Studio Code, online, right? You're seeing it. Here it's an example to continue on your point, Andre, Bruno, and others. Here it's a specification. As a developer, I'm focusing on my code, my business, and my local inner loop. And I'm defining a workload spec, right? So that's what we discussed earlier. Here, I want a Postgres. I want maybe to expose my service, right? Here, what I will do is just having placeholder in environment variable that I'm owning. And I don't care about the technical implementation, like what's the password, what's the username, is it in cluster, is it in AWS, is it in Azure? Maybe I should know, but I don't know, and I don't want to know. I want to focus on very the generic approach, right? And the aspect you all mentioned is something encapsulated, abstracted from the platform team, and I will go there. Here, what I want to show you is based on this specification. Here I have a Makefile just to show you and encapsulate for the demo the command line. Here, if you see my screen properly, we have a score compose. The score compose implementation is taking as an input the score file we just showed, generating a compose file, right? So if I run the command and to accelerate the demo, I already did that. It will transform a compose file, right? Very familiar if you're doing Docker Compose locally. It will generate that for me from the score file, right? What I want to do now is based on my snippet to accelerate again the demo, I will do Docker Compose up, right? I may have some override to inject another database because I'm referencing from my app, my workload, a Postgres database. And here there is some avenue to improve that, but maybe the platform engineering are helping me for the local setup. But that's how it works. So basically, if I run this command, I could do compose up. I will have my compose up doing the stuff, and I could test locally my application just by a curl command. Again, I accelerated the demo here, and here I'm seeing my demonstration. Talking to a PostgreSQL, it's locally, right? So that's the first step. The second step is, okay, now I want to move in the stack, in the pipeline, in the CI/CD pipeline. It was the inner loop. Maybe I will do some inner loop with Kubernetes with a kind cluster. So for here, the demo, I have a kind cluster locally, but the goal is already to anticipate what the platform will do for me in dev, in staging, in pre-prod, in production, right? With highly regulated standard. You mentioned SRE, you mentioned security. If I want to inject security context, if I want to enable PSS, pod security standard and stuff like this, is it me as a developer? No, it shouldn't, right? So it's abstracted and done over there. So here the goal is to show you, okay, next CLI is score Elm, taking this exact same input, generating the values. So if you're familiar with Elm, here it's a Elm values file, right? And here again, to accelerate the demo, I already generated based on this exact same score specification, very generic, environment and platform agnostic. I'm generating the values. And here what I do, based on a discussion and a collaboration with my platform engineering team, I have a base Elm chart that I could reuse. Here we have a defined one, which is a workload based on the spec. And you could just inject the values if you're familiar with Elm upgrade, based on this Elm chart exposed by my company and my platform engineer. I could easily inject the values and some environment variable, and I'm up and running, right? So I could do locally some tests. Again, I won't spend too much time here, but I could deploy my things here and test locally. But now, to your point, everyone, here it's me, just a developer. Now on my platform, it's highly regulated. I'm enterprise ready over there. It's security, it's SRE again, injecting, again, if I want here to inject in my workload security context, and let's say my database, it's in Google Cloud. I want workload identity on this service account. I want a Cloud SQL proxy sidecar injection, etc., etc. Is it the developer to know all of that? No. and it will be encapsulated by the platform. So that's why, and I know we are taking time, and Josh, feel free to let us know when we are almost at the end. But here, what we want to show and discuss is there is a spec, there is the abstraction. That's a developer perspective, right? And then there is a platform engineer. And here it's platform engineer and platform teams, because you mentioned security, cloud, and SRE. Here you have the notion maybe of an orchestrator. A good orchestrator, it's Argo CD, taking the values file with an unchart, and it's already abstracted from the developer with a CI/CD pipeline and GitOps with Argo CD, just deploying, injecting values like you could do, secret, etc., and actually targeting one platform, which could be Kubernetes in this case, and having this interaction with the infrastructure, injecting connection string, injecting secrets per environment, right? Dev, staging, and prod. So that's where the spec is. And you're right, it's not doing the other stuff after in the pipeline, later in the pipeline, right? So abstraction, standardization, and that's still happening and important, but the spec is very on the left-hand side. So where we see a fit here, it's on the application definition. On the white paper, we think it's on the API and CLI, if we are not mistaking here, or where a workload specification, and there is others out there, could fit. And in the maturity level, that's where we are seeing community and customers using it, where they could scale / optimize based on the maturity model you put together on the adoption and interfaces. How my users are discovering and actually using my portal and my platform. How they are interacting and consuming, right? So someone mentioned about service catalog and stuff like this. Yes, that's another aspect of that, right? Is it supported by a score yet? No, but that's the discussion that we want to take and have. So I think we spend a lot of time, and there is remaining questions. So we will share the document. So I think Suza, Josh, and teams, I think we could continue on taking some remaining question. Lou and Raphael, you were patient, and thank you for that. So yeah, any other question?
Yeah, can you come back to your VS Code, please? Just 1 minute.
Yeah, sure.
Let's let the Raphael, I think you were the first one. Let's let him go ahead and ask his question.
Oh,
sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. If it's fine for everyone. Yeah, I just wanted to. So I like the level of abstraction that Score introduces. To make it easy to adopt, I wonder if somebody could write a tutorial on how to use it with GitOps, in particular Argo, right? Because it's not straightforward.
Cool.
But
yeah,
if there was a way to say, this is my score, and then point a Argo application to a score file, and then something magical happens behind the scenes, that would be a great
suggestion taken. Thank you. Yeah, that's a good one.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's all for me.
I believe Lou had his hand up next. If you don't mind.
Yeah, for sure. It's super interesting. The framing of the problem. I mean, I get the framing of the problem for sure. The question I had really was like, what do you see as sort of alternatives to this? Because straight away, I mean, this looks very much like dev file to me. And also, I'm kind of curious to see that like the dev container is not mentioned, let's say, in the score docs. Now, of course, I mean, it's a slightly different thing because it's kind of taken a individual container sort of viewpoint. But if we're saying this is for the developer, I feel like certainly dev container needs to come into the conversation at some point. But if you want as well, this conversation might be longer than 3 minutes. So we could always take it in Slack as well. I'm in there too. But yeah, that was my question really.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you for bringing that. Long answer for sure. So I will just maybe have a high-level answer here. Definitely overlap with other tools. If you talk about OAM, if you talk about Acorn, even Radius, who presented something, they have the spec and they have as well the orchestrator. Here, it's only the spec. And to your point, Dev Container, actually, recently, we did a POC, proof of concept, with Score and Dapper. And I know that Dapper and Dev Container are working also on a quite good inner loop debugging and interesting use cases. And we demonstrated how, you remember the compose file, how you could inject this sidecar, how you could inject a Dev Container with your use case, right? So that's where we want to extend and allow the next extension of, let's say, Score Compose, for example. So yeah, there is avenue on clarification on overlap, plus supporting more use cases like this, if that makes sense. And I know I don't have 15 minutes to deep dive here.
Yeah, for sure. We could chat in slides too. That's cool. Thank you.
There is Antoine, and maybe I don't see the queue. Sorry, I don't want to moderate the Q&A. Sorry.
Yeah, I just
no,
found the raise hand.
Maybe
this is our last one because we're about at time.
Yeah,
Cool.
I need to leave in 30 seconds, so it's okay. Can you come back to your VS Code?
Sure.
Just as a quick comment, because I worked with our devs and I showed them an example, and here the variables.
Yeah.
They told me it's too complex for us. I don't want to see this. I want to say I'm going to be linked to a database and then inject something for me transparently, something normalized, where the variable names are already done by you. I don't want to say the port. For example, I want to say my container is done in Java, so please use the standard web port, something standard. In fact, they want something more simple than this.
Yeah, and actually that's a good use case. We have use cases where by convention, because here you are talking about convention, right? Here what I'm doing and showing you, it's a mapping, right? Key value kind of. Hey, when you will resolve injecting this environment variable, what you could have is a contract, is again, a contract or by convention, a convention, where actually the platform, so you remember this end chart injected? Here, that's the intelligence of your orchestrator, right? Something between the Score spec and the platform, there is someone in between. Is it Argo CD? Is it someone else? Is it something else? Actually rendering an end chart in this case. So if you look at this guy here, that's exactly this. Look at that. I'm injecting some values. So I could say, hey, you don't have to provide that. I will inject that for you. So yes, that's something you could do. And you will abstract, as a platform engineer, you will abstract that for your developers. So that's something you could do. But that's a good point, actually. Thank you for bringing that. But yeah, we have seen a scenario like this.
We are getting to time. It's 11 o'clock. We do have some more questions here, but I think that we're going to need to follow up in the Slack channel, or if folks want to, is there a way that people can reach you, Susa and Mathieu? Is that the best? Find you on Slack?
Yeah, we shared the Slack channel of Score as well. So it could be either way, your Slack channel convenience or the Slack channel of Score. We shared the link, and actually we will share this presentation with the link. So yeah, let's continue the discussion and the question. Thank you. It was great.
Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting how you're it is left up to the user to write the implementation, but you're providing a spec. So that's something to think about.
Yes.
Okay, so we'll try to write this up and share the information you've shared in our notes, and we'll provide the link to this presentation. And thank you for presenting to us all. And I think that's all for today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.